was a problem anyway. And remember, all this time, Brian never told his wife that he lost his job. And that was the way out of temptation into all this stuff that he's doing. That had he told his wife, like I said earlier, had he told his wife that he lost his job, drove home, drove into the driveway, got out of the car, opened the door, brought his box and briefcase, and the box could serve as a visual aid, and told her, they might have had a fight, they might have had struggles, things like that, but he wouldn't be standing in front of a car that he just set afire, and he wouldn't be standing after killing somebody and burying them. So it's interesting that in your setback, you don't always know, you don't always tell people what's going on. This is a person that he's married to, that he sleeps with in a bed, that he has sex with, but he can't tell her that he lost his job. So there, I can't blame the woman, because this is something that he decided to do. But it is interesting to think about that he can't tell his wife that he lost the job. Irrespective of all the flashbacks he has back to his childhood, there's still something to note, that if you're going through a setback, not everybody gonna always understand, but you should still be able to tell the person that you are sleeping with that you lost your job. So that's something I want you to think about too. So we're back to this narrative with the twins, with the teens, and so they're just giving money like there's no tomorrow, which is going to be true for one of them, and as if they earned it and it's okay to give. They're being sort of it's interesting. They're kind of being a little bit of a philanthropist, right? Remember the $25,000 that the wife is so concerned about with the Cancer Society, and Brian is so preoccupied about that $25,000, and we have lost that. He is no longer preoccupied about that anymore. But they're kind of being the same way. They're kind of maintaining appearances, just like Brian was maintaining appearances. They're not rich for real, except for Sammy. But his family is, his parents are rich. But they're not really rich for real, but they're maintaining the appearance that they are. In the same way that Brian was maintaining the appearance that he was still fine, even though he just lost his job, that he still had the same wealth or whatever, even though he just lost his job. So I thought this is very interesting. And then they get into the limo that they have purchased, and I wonder how they did that with their young age, but they have purchased a limo. And then you see Sammy, who is already rich, saying, "We're rich." And they're yelling and they're laughing and everything, and it's not even their true money. So we see now Brian sneaking into a car lot or something. I forget what it's called. He found the car, and he's trying to see if that money is in the car. Of course, it's not going to be. And then there's a phone call, and Jessie answers the phone, which reveals to Brian who they are. And this is the picture. This is Brian saying, "I will find you." So Brian knows now who were the instigators of the botched drug deal, the setback. That on their end, they created a setback for which Brian now has to try to recover. So they show up at Brian's door, right, at a meeting. You see Brian now holding a gun in the back. If you see behind his back in the jeans, I didn't catch it before, but I catch it now. He has put back on his ring, so he still has his ring on. And the two young men are just kind of scared. No, the color scheme is kind of weird here. They're all in gray and black. I don't know what to make of that. That just could be a man thing, with the exception of jeans. So I don't know. So Brian opens the suitcase, the briefcase, which remember is a work case, and there's only it's not the same $100,000. They have spent so much money of it. And so if I'm not mistaken, there's only $45,000 left, or it's either 55 or 45,000. So he tells the men what happened. He asks the young men what happened to the money, and they're quiet. And Jessie is, kind of defiant. Jessie reminds you of somebody you would see in one of those little Broadway shows, where he's I forget the name of the Broadway show, where he's fighting with other people his age. I can't think of it right now, but he's asking them what happened to it, and they refuse, basically to tell him, and then he keeps pulling that out of them. So now we see Brian using the gun. Now he took it out of his pocket and laid it on the briefcase, but that's for intimidation, right? When Jimmy pulled out a gun while he was in the bathroom, it was like maybe triggering for him, I don't know. But then when he came out and he pulled a gun out on Brian, it was to keep him back, to set him back. Here, this is a little bit of an intimidation. It's sort of like a man thing as well. And he's showing them, Brian is not going to kill them. No way he's going to kill them, but it's to show him that he means business or something like that. So there's a little bit of a ominous music that sort of comes along these three cars. These three cars actually are the drug dealers, and so they have located Brian and where he lives. And again, we see this shot of them, how important they are, so coordinated. Remember, this is the system. This is the system that Brian doesn't know anything about, that they have been tracking. We will discover at the end. That they have been tracking Brian the whole time, and the two teenagers and Jimmy. So they have really known about the whole thing. After the botched drug deal, they have known about all of the different events the whole time. And this is the system. Now, it's not a ton of cars, but you see how coordinated they are, how strategic they are. They've been driving around. When we get to the drug dealer, the head drug dealer, he basically tells us that he's been made a fool of, and that these two teens have been riding around with my money, and so that it's been clear the whole time. When you look at this frame, I want you to think about that question that Brian proposed or offered to Jimmy in the bar. How could you give $100,000 to people you don't know? And Brian does not know these people. And that's what happens when we make decisions from a place of setback. We make them not knowing how the decision is going to sort of process out. That's why we need time for reflection. It would have been better for Brian to go back home after he was laid off and stay in the house and just cook him some food, think, watch some TV or something like that. It would have been better for him to do that than to go to that bar and run into the wrong door. And Jimmy was a door. And this is what his door led to everything that you're going to see. So Brian is requiring Sammy to go and sell the car and go get the receipts and return everything. And they're not quite sure that they can, but they have to do something. Otherwise, they fear for their lives. So we're in the kids' room, which is the most ironic. Look at the chain on Jesse's leg. So he's chained up in a kid's room, right? There's a big bear over there in the corner and a big giraffe and the whole sort of kids vibe, right? It's a kid's room. And Brian is still on the phone, he lives on that phone, and then he's holding a gun. But there's a lot to unpack here. And it's so rich with interpretation that it's kind of overwhelming, right? So we have this kid tied up, right? Who felt tied up in his real life. So he's tied up in this sort of kind of fake life in a sense, because he's not, Brian is not going to kill him in the end. We know he's not going to kill him in the end. He doesn't have the character to kill him in the end, right? He has the character to hold a gun, which is kind of discovery for him, but not necessarily the character to kill him. But it's interesting that he would have the character to tie him up with a chain, tie up a kid with a chain. So you have to wonder then if that was his go-to, to tie up a kid with a chain, what did he feel like in his own childhood? Because we do what we know. We do what we are used to. We do what we are accustomed to. We do what we have seen. And so is this something that he has seen? Is there any indication in his childhood that we have seen this? If you're going through financial bankruptcy, you are automatically tied up. You're tied up in the courts because there's a court record. Then you are tied up, financially. It's hard for you to move, right? You can't so easily go get a new apartment or a new house or whatever, because you have to resolve that financial bankruptcy. And again, clearing a bankruptcy can take about 10 years. You can feel tied up in your chosen career or your given economic status. Once you get to a certain status that's a high economic status, high upper class or something like that, you have to maintain that. You have to do all that you can to maintain it. Who wants to lose a house like that? Who wants to lose the opportunity to live in a certain neighborhood? Who wants to lose the status of giving $25,000 to the Cancer Society, right? That's a big status, that you can pay $25,000 to the Cancer Society, right? Or any other type of society. Who wants to lose that? So you can feel chained in your own economic status. You can feel chained in your career, that he was the director of sales. We don't know how long he was the director of sales. But he may not have necessarily been happy in a job, because if you are a salesperson, you are a salesperson honestly anywhere. I'm not saying you could always there are transferable skills, but each industry is different. How you sell a product in one industry may be different from how you sell a product in another industry, right? But if you are a salesperson, you are doing the selling. You are always the person who is selling something. And when you look at the interaction and engagement with Jimmy and Brian, you don't see Brian selling Jimmy. You see Jimmy selling Brian, and that's why you see Brian in the current situation that he's in. So there's a lot that's going on here. Brian is on the phone. He has resorted to this sort of hostage situation to get back the money that the kids stole and spent. And the interesting thing, had he come and walked in the house and walked in the child's bedroom, it might be a different thing, right? But then you think about Jesse and how he initially just wanted to leave. He wanted to leave the city clean, but then he allowed Sammy to persuade him to jack another car. And remember, Jesse is the one who thinks he has the power in the relationship he has with Sammy. But Sammy proved to be the one who actually has the power, because at the end of the movie, it isn't Sammy who is killed. I'm not gonna let in on everything, but it isn't Sammy who is killed, right? Sammy is not only the one who gets him into this mess, but ends up walking away without dying. And this is Sammy in the car. Remember, Justin Donnelly likes to do these camera angles of the person in the car. And so we have him kind of distressed, and he's pressed in a way too, because now he got to find a way to sell all this stuff and return all this stuff to get whatever money he can to give to Brian. So I like this camera angle of Jesse in contemplation, thinking about why he knew he shouldn't have done this thing or whatever, and that he says, I'm always getting myself into these things. So that means if he's always getting himself into these things, there has not been any reflection period. Sometimes you may need time away from your friends. Sometimes being with your friends, coming from his background, being with Sammy as with friendship really helped him. It gave him some kind of release from his current troubles, especially with his relationship with his mother. But sometimes if someone is a true friend to you, then that person wouldn't encourage you to engage in criminal activity. So in other words, Jesse wasn't a real friend to Sammy, because it was Jesse who always jacked cars and got Sammy involved. But Sammy wasn't also a true friend to Jesse, because he got him into something that is going to cost him his life. And so he's sitting there thinking in quiet contemplation, I always get myself into these things, right? So they're discussing, Brian had initially brought him a water bottle, and I guess he's drinking a beer or root beer or something like that. He's still holding that gun. So now he has become attached to that gun. Never had a gun before. Gun pulled on him by Jimmy, but now he has become attached to it. So the gun is becoming a tool that he can use to solve his setback, to solve any problems that come his way. Instead of solving a problem by trying to get work or something like that, he's solving his problem by using a gun. So in this conversation, they're talking about what Jesse has been doing. Did he do college graduation? High school graduation or something like that? And Jesse is saying he didn't, or by implication, and that he just wants to leave or something. And then Brian says to Jesse, in the same way that Sammy says to Jesse, that that's not a plan. Him running away is not a plan, right? That he needs a plan. Again, irony that Brian is the one who runs away in the film, even as an adult. And he reminds us of himself in childhood, talking about how he ran away. And what he learns, what he's thinking about, or what he puts forth as an argument to Jesse here in this conversation, is that life is about being happy, doing what's right. This is his learning. Life is about being happy, doing what's right. And you often wish people would come to that understanding much earlier, so they don't have to engage in criminal activity or any other type of decision making. But life is about being happy, doing what's right. And so he learns what he learns. Maybe he's corrected it in his understanding, and then recovered, restored, and he can advance. But he's learned it too late, because now it's going to affect his uh, himself. It's going to affect him. He has now reached his mortality. So now we see the system, the drug dealing system has located Brian's house, because remember, they always coordinate their efforts when they're coming after you. And so they're going to storm the house. And so they've stormed the house. They took him hostage. They found the kids, and they're taking the kids hostage as well. Because remember, the drug dealer has known about this whole thing since the botched deal. And so Brian is actually surprised that the kids are on the plane with them. And there is sort of a choice that he puts to them, the drug dealer, that he puts to them that they cannot ignore. And the choice is essentially three things. One of them is going to walk out. One of them is going to take the place of Jimmy as a drug dealer, drug runner or something like that. And the other one is going to basically die, right? So it is Sammy who can leave. Remember, it was Sammy who got them into the situation. Sammy, he can leave. Jessie will become the drug dealer, and Brian will die. The drug dealer is kind of paranoid. He's given him these three choices out of some paranoid ego that he feels like Brian made him look bad. But it really wasn't Brian who made it look bad. It was really Jimmy who made him look bad, because he messed up. He left the money in the car and the kids jacked the car. But he has to keep up appearances. Remember, Brian has to keep up appearances. Jimmy has to keep up appearances. The kids have to keep up appearances, right? So Brian has to keep up appearances, pay the $25,000 donation. Jimmy has to keep up the appearance of being a true drug dealer type person and owning a bar. The kids keep up the appearances of spending money that they don't have, that they never earned, right? And so the drug dealer here in the plane, he has to keep up the appearances of being a forceful drug dealer who you don't mess with. So we see the drug dealer. He's engaging in conversation with Brian, and they are negotiating in a sense. But he's unyielding in his decision in that three-part decision. He's unyielding. It says a lot about the different character development. So, for instance, Sammy is the one, again, who starts out by saying this is wrong to do in terms of jacking cars. And then when there's a threat of his friend leaving, he says, let's jack a car, because he really wants his friend to stay. And then they jack the wrong car, they get the money, right? And then Sammy is the one who gets to leave. And he cares for his friend, and he has no other choice but to leave, but he doesn't force himself to stay either. It would have been interesting to say he leaves, right? And on some level that may be a trigger for Jessie when people leave. Jesse's character development, he starts out strong in the film, very ego-driven. I jacked a car, let's go ride, right? Doesn't really care about the fact that he's jacked a car, took somebody's car, left it abandoned, things like stole something from it, doesn't care. But then he gets a little contemplative. Being tied up in that kid's room makes him a little contemplative, that he thinks to himself, I'm always getting myself into these things. And that's a beginning process. If we didn't have this drug dealing context right here where one of these people are going to die, that would be a good start to begin thinking about your setback, how you make decisions, how you need to make better decisions. I'm always getting myself into these things, right? And so that will be a good journaling opportunity. That will be a good conversation or discussion opportunity. That will be a good therapist session opportunity. It's you beginning the process of grieving over your decision making. In the same way that you see Brian crying in the bathroom after killing Jimmy, you see in Jesse this willingness to really think about what he has done. And in that kids room, I forgot to note that Jesse was talking about his dream and how he wanted to own his own business. And there's nothing wrong with dreaming, but again, he had no plan. And if he had not set fire to the college brochure and gone to the college site itself and started a process of taking, business courses, law courses, or something like that, he would have been in a productive road path. Instead, when he set fire to that college brochure, he was equally creating a setback that now shifted and turned him down a different path. Then you see Brian, who's he's kind of sort of powerful with a little bit of ego in the beginning because he's a director of sales, so he got some kind of credence about him. And then it shifts when he loses his job. He's kind of bothered by it, but he's not really pressed in the beginning. Then he engages in criminal activity. And it is almost like just having coffee with somebody and having a conversation. Didn't really take it as seriously. But then when there was a threat to his livelihood and his family, his personality just shot through his face. It shot through his eyes, through his nose, through his teeth, through his mouth, through his veins. And there was the threat of him losing everything that woke him up. Because from the beginning to the end, I mean, up until that point, he was just kind of just mellow, just taking it as it is, letting Jimmy guide and direct and ship him around or whatever, and move him around. He gives money to people he don't know. He gives money to a person that he doesn't even have a working relationship with, not even a client or anything like that. And he stops looking for a job. And now he's going to feel the effects of his pressing. So the drug dealer, we don't know anything about other than what he tells us in terms of the fact that he's been watching the situation all this time. So, in some regards, he's been watching TV. He's been watching the boys spend all that, steal the car, steal the money, spend all the money. He's been watching Brian do what he's been doing all up until this point. He's been watching Jimmy. So he's been, pressing the remote in a sense and watching and telling them now what's been going on. So it's almost like a summary. Here it is. We're at the end of the film, and it almost works like a summary. Him summarizing what's been going on. So when he puts forth the three options, it is clear that Brian is fighting for Sammy, because he considers Sammy the weaker one, versus it's interesting that Brian fights for Sammy for Sammy than he does for Jesse to leave. He spent more time with Jesse even if it was a short time, he spent more time with Jessie in the kids' room than he did with Sammy. But Brian interprets Sammy as the weaker one, and so he says, let him go. But you look at this also from an economic standpoint too. Brian is rich at this time. Even though he's about to die, he's rich. Or he has, some money, right? And Sammy comes from a rich background. And so when you look at it from a very selfish, ego-based standpoint, rich stayed rich. Because Jessie is poor in this scenario. He's the poor one. So then it's obvious that we're going to send the poor one and make the poor one the drug runner, right? Because remember that Jessie is going to take the place of Jimmy, whom Brian killed. And Jimmy was a drug runner or drug dealer or whatever you want to say. But it's interesting that Brian would save Sammy, tell Sammy that he could leave. It's Brian who's making the decision. Brian is making a decision to save Sammy and not Jessie. And even though Brian had conversations and discussions and tried to protect him while he was in the house and while they were sitting in the kids' room. And, interesting too that Jessie sitting in the kids' room could easily be Brian's son later sitting in the kids' room, right? And to me, it was like looking at his own son or the future of his own son. But the future of his own son really looks like Sammy. And it's interesting that he would save Sammy, whom he didn't have any conversation, long extended conversation, didn't try to save from the people who stormed the house, and had conversations with Jessie, try to save him in the house, things like that, that he wouldn't save him. And he has the decision, he has the power right now. Even though the drug dealer is granting Brian the power to choose, but Brian has the power right now to decide 3 lives, which include his own. And there was no way that he was going to leave those 2 kids on the plane. That wasn't going to happen. No way he was going to do that. He couldn't live with himself if he did something like that. But again, it's interesting that he would choose to save Sammy, the rich kid, over the poor kid. And you can think about this in terms of multiple applications to different economic statuses and policies and different things or whatever. But it is a very interesting dynamic here. So Sammy is the one who is permitted to leave. Remember, Sammy was a wannabe carjacker, in the same way that I feel that Jimmy was a wannabe drug dealer, right? And so they have that kind of instance together. But he's walking away, and all of the drug dealing guards, security, are watching him walk away. And so his life is saved, and he will be able to go on and do the things that he wants to do. Now, this is going to live with him forever, but he will be able to go on. And the interesting thing, in the same way that they didn't earn that money to spend it the way they did, Sammy didn't earn respect for his life, really, because Sammy was the one who initiated, even though it was Jessie who had been jacking cars and bringing Sammy along. Sammy was the one who made this last decision to jack a car and bring Jessie along. And he didn't know that it was going to be a life-changing decision. So what you see here is that looking back, remember, Brian looks back a couple of times in the film. What you see here is Sammy hearing the gunshot. So you don't see Jessie outside or anything like that. So that means Jessie is sitting on the plane when the drug dealer shoots Brian. So that's going to bring about all new different types of triggers for Jessie to stay the course. So now he is living in his setback. And Jessie is not going to be able to get out of this setback of drug running and drug dealing unless he, dies out. Blood in, blood out. He didn't choose to enter drug dealing and become a drug runner, right? He didn't choose that, so it's not blood in. But the only way he can exit is by blood out. So he's stuck while Sammy goes on and enjoys his life. So this is Sammy putting up a poster for Jesse McAllister. You can't really tell his family, right? Because the drug dealer said he would kill his whole family. But he's never going to see Jesse again. So, it's funny that he was trying to keep Jesse from leaving, but ended up losing him anyway. It would have been better for him just to let Jesse go, find his way. And if he was going to find his way back to Sammy, he was going to find his way back. But he held on too long to the point that he ended up losing his friend. So we see the house sold. We know as the viewing audience that Brian is dead. And so the house is sold. That means that his wife is going to have to move out of the house. This is a greater view of the house. And this is a very nice house, very nicely landscaped and everything. And you think to yourself, why would you want to do anything to keep you from staying in this house? Somewhere you must think you don't deserve it. Because if you think that you deserve a house like this, you wouldn't make the types of decisions that will cause you to lose the house. So now he has created a setback. Brian's decision has created a setback for his wife to the point that she's homeless now. So now we can go back to that visual of the homeless man asking Brian for money. And that we could say that's a foreshadowing of his wife becoming homeless and having to ask for money. If she's losing a house, she's homeless because she would likely have to move in with her parents. So she's homeless, right? So the time span can be short or long. It doesn't matter. But his decision to engage in drug dealing created homelessness for his own family and created death for him. So this is his wife holding on, thinking about, remember that this is the same kitchen that Brian was in with the two young teens, the two young adults, and they were discussing how they were going to get the money back and things like that. This is the same kitchen, right? And the wife had no idea. And we don't know if she knows her husband is dead. We just know that he's not there. And so this is her again, thinking and praying. Thinking and about her situation. And to me, she seems like she's more concerned about losing the house. Because if she was so concerned about losing her husband, she would be holding up pictures of him. She would be when Brian left the kids' room to take a breather from talking to Jesse, he went into the foyer of the house and looked at pictures of him and his wife. He was sitting on the porch and laying on her chest or something like that. And then there were other pictures of him and the family, of them as a family. And he was crying. And then he came back to the room, and that's when they had another conversation about Jesse and a dream. And but I don't see. It's kind of, there are so many questions here. I don't see her crying over her husband. So I wonder if she knows he's dead or if he has left them, abandoned them. But even a woman who is mad at her husband for leaving, and he hasn't died or anything like that, just leaving, she would still pick up a picture and look at him. Even if she throws the picture across the room or something. We don't see any of that. So I think in this frame, you don't see her raising her head and looking about the house. But in the movie, you see her raising her head and looking about the house. And she's bothered by losing the house, to me. because I don't see her picking up a picture and looking at her husband and crying over her husband as if she knows he's dead. So now that the wife has gone through the house, touching the walls, feeling sad about leaving the house, she's now exiting it. And just before she gets to this SUV here, and if you can remember, she was leaving with the child, with their child, Brian's son, in an SUV and going to some trip. So now she's having to leave this house for good. And just before she gets to the house, to the car, she does a couple of look backs, right? And remember, looking backward is something that you see the characters do throughout the film. So she finally gets into the car very slowly, and then she drives off. But what is most interesting about the last scene of the movie before the ending credits is that the big truck that was tracking Brian, Jimmy, Jessie, and Sammy is now tracking her. And so we see this frame now. And so she's in the car that's further ahead, but you see this black SUV tracking her. And so I don't know what that all means, but this is important too, because remember, Brian doesn't know that industry, doesn't know that hierarchy, doesn't know how things run. And so even if the drug dealer says, you better not tell anybody or I will kill your family, it doesn't mean that the drug dealer is going to leave those people alone. He might still keep an eye on Brian's wife, whether she knows anything or not, or on Sammy, whether he knows anything or not. He's definitely going to keep his foot on Jesse's neck, so to speak, because now he's taking the place of Jimmy. And so this system always tracks you. It always keeps tabs on you. It always knows everything. The drug dealer at the end, when he was summarizing all of the events in a sense, right? He's when I re-listened to the audio to see if I needed to make any changes, I noticed that he comes off as omniscient, right? Like a God-like figure, and that they know everything. No matter what they say to you, don't listen to what they are saying to you. They're going to come after you some kind of way. They're going to attach some kind of claim to you. You might meet some representative of theirs or something like that, so they can track you. But it's never a clean slate. Remember Jesse saying that he wanted to leave the city clean? Well, he could have left the city clean without flatlining, but once he went down the road of drug dealing, or stealing that money, it took him down the path of now becoming a drug dealer like Jimmy. And so you never quite leave clean. So now whatever argument that he put forth earlier in the movie about leaving clean, he'll never be able to leave clean now. Never. Like I said in a previous audio area of this lecture, that his leaving clean it's going to come with conditions now. It's like blood in, blood out, entering a gang. That's why individuals who decide to enter a gang, they have no clue about what that hierarchy is, what that system is, what influence they have until they get in it. But today, with so much information, you can find out about these things. So that's kind of what I want to leave you with. I didn't originally add this. I just added it after re-listening to the audio to check for any sort of mistakes. And I noticed that this black SUV is following Brian's wife. And it's ominous. Is you see that it's dark, right? And the movie started out as dark, and now it is ending as dark. And so that's something that